everyone and welcome back to the channel. First things first, I'd like to give a big shout out to everyone who's subscribed to the channel in recent days and to everyone who's engaged with the content and made comments and liked the videos. It's really great to see. Today's episode looks back at the classic 1994 movie, The Shawshank Redemption, directed by Frank Darabont and starring Tim Robbins and Morgan Freeman. An adaptation of Stephen King's novella Rita Hayworth and The Shawshank Redemption, the movie is one of the all-time greats and renowned for being one of a small number of films to make grown men cry. I strongly urge you to stop this video and go and watch it if you are one of the few that haven't done so, as I'll be covering several plot points in this analysis. With that said, let's get started. The film begins in 1947 in Portland, Maine, with Andy Dufresne, a gifted and talented banker, on trial for the double murder of his wife and her lover. We see shots of Andy sat in his car, inebriated and loading a .38 caliber pistol. These images are intertwined with his testimony in the courtroom. He asserts that he drove home and only had the intention of scaring his adulterous wife and her lover, having thrown his pistol into the river, but dredging failed to locate the weapon. With circumstantial evidence, he is charged and condemned to serve 2 life sentences back to back. The prison is formidable and hellish, supervised by the pious, holier-than-thou but altogether cruel Warden Samuel Norton and his brutal, compassionless and sadistic guard captain, Byron Hadley. Andy strikes up a friendship with Ellis Boyd Redding, otherwise known as Red, a contraband smuggler serving a life sentence for murder, who procures him a rock hammer and a poster of Rita Hayworth for his cell. At the same time, Andy is regularly attacked and assaulted by a prison gang called the Sisters and their leader Boggs. In 1949, Andy's group of inmates managed to land outdoor work, resurfacing one of the prison rooftops. He overhears Hadley complaining about being taxed on an inheritance and precariously intervenes in the conversation, offering to help him legally shelter the money in exchange for cold beer for him and his friends. Later on, after Andy is nearly killed in a vicious assault by the Sisters, Hadley is waiting for Boggs to return to his cell and subsequently hospitalizes him. Needless to say, the Sisters leave Andy alone from then on. The warden meets Andy during a cell inspection and decides to move him out of the laundry to work as an assistant to elderly prison librarian Brooks Hadlam. The pretext for Andy's relocation is for him to organize financial matters for the prison staff. This role grows as more and more business comes his way. Alongside this, Andy decides to try and improve the decrepit prison library, writing a letter a week to the state senate to request funding. In 1954, Brooks is paroled into a world that is alien to him. He cannot cope with this and self-terminates. After years of writing, Andy receives a library donation of records, books and sundries, including a copy of The Marriage of Figaro that he plays over the prison PA system. And this stunt lands him in solitary. But when he rejoins the group, he asserts that hope is what got him through this time, a fact that Red treats with disdain. And by the early 60s, the warden is exploiting prison labour to undercut skilled workers and receiving bribes, which he has Andy launder under an imaginary silent partner called Randall Stevens. Andy later confides in Red that although being clean on the outside, he had to come to prison to be a crook. In 1965, young Tommy Williams comes to Shawshank, incarcerated for burglary. Joining Andy's social group, he approaches Andy to help him pass his GED exam. Initially reluctant to waste his time with a loser, he gives in to Tommy's requests and asserts that if we do this, we go all the way, nothing half-assed. He mentors Tommy and takes him under his wing. Tommy reveals to Red and Andy that he met an inmate at another prison who claimed responsibility for the murders Andy was convicted of and could potentially vouch for his innocence. Andy approaches the warden with this information, but Norton refuses to listen and dismisses the story as a fabrication. Although Andy promises that if he were ever released, he would stay quiet about the money laundering, the comment lands him in solitary. Norton then has Hadley murder Tommy and makes it look like an escape attempt. Andy refuses to continue the money laundering, but relents when Norton threatens to burn down the library, remove Andy's protection from the guards, and, quote, cast him down with the sodomites. Once Andy leaves solitary after 2 months of confinement, he tells Red that if he were ever to get out, he would want to live in a place called Zihuatanejo on the coast of Mexico. Red is doubtful, But Andy insists that if Red should be released, that he visit a specific hayfield in Buxton, Maine, and retrieve a package that Andy buried there. Red is worried about Andy's state of mind, especially since he asked another inmate, Haywood, for a length of rope. The following day at roll call, Andy is nowhere to be seen. The warden, understandably irate, throws a rock at the picture of Raquel Welch on Andy's wall. To his and Hadley's horror, the rock goes straight through and into a tunnel that Andy had been digging for the past 17 years. The previous night, Andy had crawled through it and escaped to freedom through the prison sewer pipe, escaping with Norton's suit, shoes and a ledger book with all of the evidence of money laundering. While the guards are searching for him that morning, he poses as Randall Stevens and collects all of the money that had been laundered over the years as severance pay for his incarceration. He then mails the ledger and evidence of the corruption and murder at Shawshank to a local newspaper, and the police arrive at the prison. Hadley is taken into custody, but the warden self-terminates to avoid arrest. After serving 40 years, Red is finally paroled. As with Brooks, he struggles to adapt to life outside prison, and contemplates violating his parole just to be allowed back to jail. He is prevented by the promise he made to Andy, and sets off for the Buxton hayfield. He finds a cachet of money and a letter asking him to come to Zihuatanejo. Violating his parole and filled with hope, he travels to Fort Hancock, Texas, and crosses the border. Arriving at a beach in Zihuatanejo, Red finds Andy fixing up the boat he had dreamed about while in prison, and the two are reunited. I think firstly the underlying message of this film for me is that ultimately the companionship of true friends, or brothers if you will, is extremely beneficial. Using Andy as example, his mere association as the husband of his adulterous wife places him in the precarious situation at the start of the film, and gets him wrongfully imprisoned. If he'd stayed home instead of just hanging around the scene intoxicated, which poses its own problems, or simply acknowledged the cheating and gone out into town himself and found somebody else, thus giving him an alibi, he would have done much better. He could have divorced his wife, but obviously in the 40s this was not the done thing. As such, his wife cost him his promising and lucrative career as a gifted banker, and also those most precious resources, freedom, liberty and time. I believe that the scene where Andy is deloused symbolises the cleansing of all prior attachments and signals the start of his apprenticeship, a purgatory where he will work towards ultimate redemption, liberty and enlightenment. Indeed, the first night he spends in Shawshank is summarised by a superb line in the narration by Red. Whole life blown away in the blink of an eye, nothing left but all the time in the world to think about it. Andy accomplishes great things in prison, given the time that he has there, and pursues many hobbies and passions within the scope of his incarceration. Quote from the warden after he's sized Andy up: "Salvation lies within." I believe this quote is extremely powerful as a maxim for everyone to live their life, but it holds particularly relevance for men going their own way, and men that have had everything taken from them, as Andy had. Funnel all your time, energy, passion and enthusiasm into your pursuits, and truly one can attain greatness. In the film, Andy puts his time into numerous passions that he has, such as chess, carving pieces, getting a board, teaching Red how to play. He also has enthusiasm for geology and rocks. He has the library project, money laundering scheme for the warden, financial advice for the guards. He's writing letters all the time to upgrade the library. He helps inmates pass their high school diplomas. He has a thirst for knowledge. So, in order to just absorb that huge amount of time that he obviously thinks he's going to be there forever, for the rest of his natural life, he absorbs the time with all of these different pursuits. Meanwhile, he knows that he's got another project going on in his prison cell. The value of giving his time to help inmates pass the high school diplomas, acting as their mentor, is invaluable, and evokes some of the great mentors out there on YouTube in this space, people that give their time, energy and resources to help out their brothers as well. I think the film shows the strength of brotherhood and friendship over obsession with women in relationships and dating, in my view. Andy invests all of his time in his passion, partly because he has to do something to occupy this time. I hope you enjoyed my interpretation of Andy's fall from grace and subsequent salvation. I know I enjoyed putting it together. It's been a long time since I've seen the film, and I had another run through it last week, and it is one of those great masterpieces. As always, I'd love to hear your comments, thoughts and perspectives down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with new content. And until next time, take care.